Before we begin the talk, let's cultivate our motivation. And be aware in your life how you exist in dependence on other living beings. We may feel like we are a solid individual, independent of everybody else. But in fact, our whole life is dependent on the efforts and the kindness of other living beings. In fact, more than any other time in human history, I think we're more dependent now on others for our food, clothing, shelter, medicine. Sitting here this evening, this beautiful room, being able to share the Dharma is due to the kindness of so many living beings who built all the different facets of the building and organized the teachings and constructed the roads that we drove on to get here. So our entire lives we've been the recipients of tremendous kindness. So try and feel that. Let that fact into your heart. And yet all these beings who have been kind to us are like us under the influence of ignorance and afflictions and karma, taking one rebirth after the next, experiencing all the dukkha or suffering in cyclic existence. So seeing their kindness and also their misery, let a sense of compassion arise in your mind. A wish to alleviate the suffering of other living beings. And seeing that we have the great fortune to have encountered the Dharma, then we have some responsibility to repay that kindness of others. And the best way to do that is through attaining full awakening and having the wisdom, compassion, and power of a Buddha to effectively help others. And so with that kind of intention to become fully awakened, then let's listen and share the Dharma this evening. So generating our motivation before a Dharma talk is a very important thing because our motivation is the chief determinant of the value of the action that we do. So it's not how we look to others, whether we look virtuous or not. It's what's going on in here, if we have a positive intention or not. So that's why we always start out every activity really checking in with our own hearts and making sure that we have the proper motivation. So it's good to take a few minutes and always do this. Okay, now mind and rebirth. This is a big topic that I will do my best to squeeze into an hour or so. Okay, so what we call mind, or chitta, is the Sanskrit and Pali word. Mind is not an excellent translation of the Sanskrit and Pali word, because in English, when we say mind, we think something up here, don't we? When we say heart, we think something here. Actually, the word chitta can be translated as either mind or heart. And we use the word mind, but it doesn't mean intellect. It means the part of us that is cognitive, that experiences things, perceives, feels emotions, thinks. Okay? So it's the whole part of us that is cognitive, and experiential. So the body is just a bunch of vegetable glue. Yeah, it's made of atoms and molecules. Yeah, it came from the earth and it's going to go back into the earth. All parts of our body get recycled. So the nature of the body is something physical. We can know it through scientific instruments. We can measure it through those instruments. We can see it, feel it, smell it, taste it, I don't know, touch it. Okay? But the mind, the cognitive part of us, is not made of atoms and molecules. It's not material. We can't see it or feel it or taste it or touch it or hear it. So the body and the mind, our coarse body and mind, are very different natures. One is form or material, the other is not. When we talk about mind, the definition of mind is that which is clear and cognizant. Okay? So mind has those two qualities: clarity, cognizance. Clarity has two meanings. It can mean clear in the sense that it's not molecular or material in nature, or clear can also mean that the mind, the consciousness, has the ability to reflect objects, like a mirror reflects objects. Okay. The other quality of mind, cognizance, means that the mind can engage with objects. It can apprehend them. It can interact with them. Okay? So when we say I, meaning the person, what we're designating I in dependence upon is the collection of the body and mind. Okay, so when we're alive, our body and mind have a relationship with each other. In dependence upon that collection, we say I, or the person. Okay. But before the body and mind came together at the time of time of conception, they had different continuities. The continuity of the body was molecular, the sperm and the egg of our parents. The continuity of the mind goes back into previous lives. After we die, death is nothing more than the separation of the body and mind, that collection breaking up. So the body again has its own continuity. It gets buried and recycled in the earth, or it gets burned and recycled in the sky. Okay. And the mind has its own continuity, one moment of clarity and cognizance producing the next moment of clarity and cognizance. Okay, and so there's a continuity of mind after death, and that mind, when it is under the influence of ignorance and craving, then it gets reborn, and what influences what it gets reborn as is our karma, or our actions. Okay, so that's the big picture. Now you're going to say, yeah, okay, we can trace the body back. One moment of, atoms and molecules coming from the preceding moment. Maybe you can trace that back to the Big Bang. But even before the Big Bang, there was a continuity of material, or whatever has the potential to become material. Yeah, there was never a beginning point to form or material. It just changes aspect. Okay? So the Big Bang may have been the origin of this particular universe, but before the Big Bang, there was still the continuity of material things. And so similarly, in the future, the universe may expand, it may contract again. Yeah, material turns into energy, energy turns back into material, but there's still this continuity of a similar type. In the same way, consciousness or mind has a continuity of a similar type. So if we look at that moment of mind, this moment of mind, okay, that moment of consciousness, what were its causes? It came from the previous moment of consciousness. Because one moment of clarity and cognizance produces the next moment. Okay, so this moment of mind happened from the preceding moment. That moment of mind from the moment of mind preceding it. Today's mind from yesterday's mind from the mind of the day before yesterday. And in that way, we can trace the continuity of consciousness back through our lives. Okay? So we may get to a point, well, actually it may happen fairly soon, where we don't remember exactly what we were doing at a certain point in our life. Okay? So we may say, okay, yeah, today's mine from yesterday's mine, this month's mine from last month's mine, this year's mine from last year's mine. But maybe sometime around 2 or 3 years old, I can't remember anything. Yeah. So how do I know I had mine then? Okay. Memory is not the only way we can know that we had consciousness. The fact that we don't remember something doesn't mean it didn't exist. We don't remember where we put our car keys this morning. Okay? So we may not remember being an infant. We may not remember being in the womb. But we can look at babies now, and we know babies have consciousness and they experience happiness and suffering. And so you can trace the consciousness of the infant, back in the womb, all the way until the moment of conception. So conception is the sperm and the egg and the consciousness coming together. You need those three to make a baby. It's not just a sperm and an egg. Because lots of scientists tell us that you can have a fertilized egg, but it doesn't necessarily turn into a baby. Yeah, it's missing consciousness. So we can trace consciousness back to that moment of conception, with one moment of mind being produced from the previous moment of mind being produced from the previous moment. So where did that first moment of mind come from in this life? Yeah. Where did it come from? Did it come from the sperm and the egg? Did it come because of a stork? Yeah. Did it appear magically without a cause? Nothing can function and appear without a cause. It needs a cause. Yeah. It wasn't the stork. Okay. And our mind didn't come from our parents' mind either. Because if it did, then our parents really lost their minds when they had us. So rather, that first moment of consciousness came from the preceding moment of consciousness. That wasn't together with this body. It was in an intermediate state between one lifetime and the next. And that moment of consciousness came from the previous moment, until you get to our previous life, the moment of death of the previous life. And that moment came from the previous moment and previous moment. And you can trace the continuity of consciousness back infinitely in the same way that you can trace the continuity of matter back infinitely, even though they are two different continuities. Now somebody's going to say, but, when was the beginning? When was the first moment of consciousness? Well, the answer to that question is there wasn't one. And you go, there has to be a beginning. Why does there have to be a beginning? Why? Who said there had to be a beginning? Or is that just an idea of our insecure mind that can't comprehend infinity. Remember math class and the number line? And you go forward 1, 2, 3, 4, infinitely, you never reach a final number. -1, -2, -3, infinitely in the minus numbers, never reach a beginning. Yeah, if you go to your math teacher and say, but there has to be a beginning and an end to the number line, what's your math teacher going to say? Okay, go find it. Good luck. Yeah? You're free to believe there's a beginning, but go find it. So in the same way, beginningless mind. When we die from this life, one moment of clarity and cognizance produces the next moment, the next moment, the next moment. Yeah, the continuity of mind goes into the future. While we are sentient beings, that is, beings who are not fully awakened Buddhas, yeah, and especially, I should say more specifically, while we are ordinary beings under the influence of ignorance and craving, then we're going to continue to take one samsaric rebirth after another, because our ignorance and our craving and our polluted karma push us to do that. It's while ignorance has no beginning and craving and karma have no beginning, ignorance, craving, and karma do have an end. Yeah. When we use wisdom to see the nature of reality, that wisdom, because it sees reality, can overpower ignorance, which does not see reality. When ignorance ceases, craving and other afflictions cease, the creation of karma that causes rebirth and samsara ceases. However, the clear and cognizant nature of the consciousness never ceases. It goes on. Okay? If you train as a bodhisattva, then that continuity of consciousness continues, and you can choose to appear again in samsara and work for the benefit of others. When you become a fully awakened Buddha, there's still consciousness, there's still mind, and you have the ability to manifest in many different kinds of forms according to the needs of different kinds of sentient beings. Yeah, so the continuity of consciousness goes on limitlessly in the future, but it doesn't have to always be an ignorant continuity, because ignorance can be overcome. Samsara can be eliminated. Okay, you with me so far? Okay. So you can see, if you can follow this kind of reasoning, then you can see that actually we can prove rebirth through using reasoning. That it's not just a matter of faith. We don't accept rebirth because Buddha said so. We accept rebirth because it makes sense. Because everything that functions must arise due to causes. It can't arise without causes. So we can trace the causes of the body. We must be able to trace the causes of the mind back into the past. Yeah? We can trace the continuity of matter in the future. We can trace the continuity of consciousness in the future. Because there's nothing that can make clarity and cognizance cease. Okay. The candle, there's a continuity of light from one moment to the next, but as soon as the fuel is consumed, the light goes out. Yeah. So the absence of the fuel makes the light cease. Yeah. You had a building across the street before. Calling in the construction workers to demolish it made that building cease. But with consciousness, with mind, there is nothing that can make its continuity cease. Yeah. In other words, death may cease this life, but it doesn't cease the continuity of consciousness. Mind goes on into a future life. Okay? So you can see, like I said before, that if you can follow the reasoning, that accepting rebirth is not something you do out of blind faith. You do it from reasoning. And the Buddha wants us to be able to prove things through reasoning, not through blind faith. Because if we believe things through blind faith, then every single person who comes here and teaches, you're going to believe whatever they say. Maybe, well, you have a lot of good teachers coming here, so that's okay. But, if you have Charlatananda come, Charlatananda? Yeah, who makes up their own doctrine and proclaims themselves a spiritual leader, different kinds of charlatans. Yeah, if our beliefs are not grounded in reasoning, then every time someone comes and tells us this, that, or the other thing, we will believe it. Yeah, the Buddha said that doesn't lead to stay a stable basis for your spiritual practice. Yeah, we have to know through reasoning, we have to know through experience. Okay? And so in that way, we can really establish rebirth. Now, how does establishing rebirth influence how we live? If we accept rebirth, how's that going to influence how we live our life? Okay, well, for one, we'll realize that our life did not happen by accident, that there were causes to it. Yeah. Have you ever wondered why you were born you and not born somebody else? Yeah? As a kid, I used to wonder that a lot. Why wasn't I born in another country? Yeah? Why was I born family and not in another country or even another planet? Yeah? Why was I born me, thinking the way I think, instead of born as somebody else who thought in a very different way? So all of that has to happen because of causes. It's not accidental. Yeah? Things cannot happen by accident or randomly. They need causes. So in that way, if we say, okay, why was I born like this? instead of as something else, well, there were causes, and those causes are karmic causes. Karma simply means the actions that we do. The mental actions, the verbal actions, the physical actions. And the actions that we do leave a trace after they cease. So we can call this a karmic seed if we want to, but it's not a physical seed. It's not anything you can touch. It just means that an action happened. And when the causes and conditions come together for any particular karmic seed to ripen and bear its fruit, then it will do that. So at the end of each lifetime, as we're actively dying, then under the influence of craving and clinging, different karmic seeds are nourished and become activated, and they influence what kind of body and where, and what kind of person we are attracted to become. Okay? So it's not like between one life and a next life, we're sitting up in the sky on a cloud somewhere, looking down, saying, okay, who's going to be mom and dad next life? Yeah, I'm taking applications. Oh, you look good. I think I'll choose you. If we're highly realized, we can direct our mind to a particular family. I don't know about you, but I'm not highly realized. Yeah. So for those of us who are not highly realized, the force of our karma, the force of our craving and clinging projects us, propels us to find a certain kind of body-mind complex. And we take rebirth in that. Okay? So there is no self that is some kind of permanent, monolithic, independent entity that goes from one life to the next. There is no soul that goes from one life to the next. Rather, consciousness goes from one life to the next, but that consciousness is changing in every nanosecond. It is never the same from one split second to the next. So there's no permanent soul, there's no permanent self, there is no essence that is the essence of me. There is only this constantly changing flow of consciousness that joins with one body, which is also changing moment to moment. And it joins with one body, creates a life. Death happens, which means the body and mind cease. The body gets recycled. The mind gets attracted. The ignorant mind gets attracted to another body in another kind of realm. And samsara continues. Okay. Why we're practicing Dharma is because we've been on this merry-go-round of samsara beginninglessly. So they say that we've been born as everything. We've done everything. except practice the Dharma. Okay? So as they say, been there, done that, got the t-shirt. Okay? This lifetime, we're trying to get a different t-shirt. But just getting your Nalanda t-shirt or your YBAM t-shirt is not sufficient. Yeah, we have to cultivate Dharma realizations. Because if we don't, then ignorance continues, attachment continues, anger, jealousy, resentment, arrogance, all those things continue, and we are just buffeted around like a leaf in the wind by our karma. Yeah. So it's through practicing the Dharma that we learn how to control our mind, and we learn how to create the causes for happiness, how to abandon the causes of suffering, how to create the causes for liberation and abandon the causes for samsara, how to create the causes for full awakening, how to abandon the causes that keep us somehow obscured. Okay? So this is the meaning and purpose of our life. Yeah. Beginning when I was a teenager, no, actually it began earlier. Yeah, when I was little, I was, in addition to wondering, why was I born me? I used to wonder, what's the meaning and purpose of my life? Why am I here? Yeah, why am I here? And I looked at the lives that people were living around me, and, I said, what's the meaning of their life? And for most people, it's try and get as much happiness as you can through sense pleasure. Try and get money. Try and have a family. Try and be popular. Try and be famous. Yeah, try and have a lot of possessions. But I always looked and I said, okay, you get all of that stuff, but when you die, you leave it all here. I don't care how much money you burn from the bank of hell. It doesn't go to your next life. Okay? Even your ringgit, even your dollars, it doesn't go to your next life. Even you burn it. But you're not going to burn it. Because you may think that the bank of hell notes go to the next life, but you're not going to give up your ringgit in this life. So, so you have a big house, but when you die, your house doesn't come with you, and your family doesn't come with you, and all your statues and awards don't come with you. And even they do a fantastic obituary about you. Even they name a building after you. You aren't around to enjoy it. Yeah? Even you have your whole cell phone full of pictures about your life. Are you going to look at them after you're reborn in your next life? I don't think so. So considering that at the time of death, our money and possessions don't come with, our friends and relatives don't come with, and even this thing, our body, that we've never been separated from the moment of conception, even this thing doesn't go into the next life. So what does come with us? And what is valuable? And what's going to determine and influence what our future life is? Yeah. That's our karma, our actions. And especially the habitual mental actions. Yeah. The way we cultivate our mind, that comes with us. Yeah. The karmic seeds from verbal, mental, physical actions, that comes with the consciousness. And that determines where the mind gets reborn and what we experience in our next life. So considering that that's what is long-lasting and comes with us at the time of death, then we better pay attention to the karma that we're creating now and the mental habits that we're familiarizing ourselves with now. Okay? Because that's what's going to really influence whether we experience happiness or misery in our future lives. Okay? So, unlike what regular society tells us, the Buddha tells us, yeah, observe your mind, transform your mind, tame your mind. The mind is the source of happiness and pain. Yeah. And that's what's really valuable. Because if we may make a ton of money, but if we create negative karma by cheating customers, lying to clients, bad-mouthing people who are our competitors, even if we create a ton of money, but also with a ton of destructive karma, that money's going to stay here and our karma goes with us. So looking at it from that viewpoint, creating a lot of negative karma in order to have money and possessions and good reputation in this life, it's not worth it in the long term. It's just not worth it. Yeah. So it's much better to pay attention to our actions and try and cultivate virtuous mental states. Because if we do, then they will be active at the time of death. We will die peacefully. We will transition into our next life without a lot of turbulence. We will have a fortunate rebirth where we can continue to practice the Dharma, continue to create the causes for liberation and awakening. Okay? So that has meaning in the long term. That has purpose in the long term. One time, some years ago, I went on pilgrimage in mainland China. And I went with two of my friends who lived in Shanghai. And we were traveling by bus and so on. And one place where we were in some small town, small village, there was a tea shop. And on the wall of the tea shop, they had a picture of the Gang of Four. Remember the Gang of Four? That was so powerful in China, that created so much chaos. So my Chinese friends looked at that picture and they said, these people had so much power. when they were alive. And now they're probably in the hell realm as a result of the harm and the destructive karma they created because they misused their power. So even though the picture of them is there, and even though people may still look and go, oh, the gang of four, they're very powerful, those people no longer exist. The continuity of their minds are born in another consciousness, in another body. And because of the harm they did while they're alive, their realm of rebirth is not going to be a happy one. So this is something we should learn from. Yeah? So that we don't make the same mistake as those people. I would love to teach this to Donald Trump. Yeah? Because he creates so much negative karma. Incredible the amount of negative karma that this man creates. He may be powerful now, but he's 71 years old. He's not going to be around forever. And his next rebirth, we have to have compassion. Yeah? It's not going to be a happy rebirth. I thought that I should probably tell you some stories, too, about people who remember rebirths, their previous lives, because this also helps us to see that, we may not remember our previous lives, but other people do. How many of you have seen the movie Kundun? It was out maybe a number of years ago, okay? So that movie talks about how they found the present Dalai Lama, okay, who's the 14th Dalai Lama. Okay. That doesn't mean that his consciousness began with the first Dalai Lama. Consciousness was beginningless, but it's just the recognition as a reincarnation is a Tibetan cultural phenomena. Okay, so it's quite interesting how they found the present Dalai Lama. Tibetans have this whole mechanism for it, and one is that they go to this one lake. It's very high up, maybe 18,000 feet, very high. It's called Lamo Latso, and they sit on the ridge and they do different pujas, and then they can see syllables and symbols reflected in the lake that is down below. And so, they did this after the 13th Dalai Lama passed away. And then they sent out, after a few years, also there was another sign. When the 13th Dalai Lama lay in state, in the room where his body was, on the northeast corner of the pillars, a special kind of moss or something grew. So they took this as a signal that the 14th Dalai Lama was born in the northeast. And they saw the letters, I forget what letters, maybe A and M, something like that. Anyway, they sent out a search party. When they sent out a search party to look for the next Dalai Lama, they don't go and say, we're looking for the next Dalai Lama. Why? Because everybody's going to bring their kid and say, it's my kid. Because every parent believes their kid is the best one. Yeah. So they don't advertise that. They go out and they were dressed as merchants. Okay? So some of the high lamas, the monks who knew the previous Dalai Lama, they dressed as the people who took care of the animals. Yeah. Because, in old Tibet, this was like must have been, His Holiness was born in 35, so it was probably around 38. So in old Tibet, they don't have hotels and motels, okay? You just found a farmhouse and asked the people there if you could stay. The people who took care of the animals always went to hang out in the kitchen because the people who take care of the animals are kind of regarded as lower, and so they hung out in the kitchen with the cooks. And the children were always in the kitchen. The people who were the merchants, they went into the shrine room, so they never got to meet the children. So these monks were dressed up as the people who took care of the animals. And they came across one farmhouse. They asked if they could stay there. It fit the description of what they had seen as an image in the lake. And these monks went into the kitchen, And so there was a little boy there who comes and he jumps on the lap of one of the monks who's dressed up as an animal caretaker. And the monk is wearing the prayer beads or the mala that belong to the 13th Dalai Lama. And the child comes up and pulls on the prayer beads and says, these are mine. Yeah, give them to me. And one of the monks, dressed up as the animal caretaker, said, we will, but tell us first who this person is who's wearing it. And the child said, this is Lama so-and-so. He recognized the person from his previous life. Okay? So that's how they found the 14th Dalai Lama. But there's also common people that remember their previous lives. His Holiness tells the story of one young girl in India. This was some years ago. And she was born in one village. And from the time she was very young, she kept saying, I want to go back to this other village. That's my village. My mother and father are there. And her mother and father kept saying, no, we're your mother and father. Yeah. Finally, they took her back. They took her to that other village. And she found the mother and father from her previous lives. And she identified them. She's just a small girl. I also saw a video that was quite remarkable of some people in Australia who were hypnotizing people and then seeing if any of these people could remember their previous lives. So I don't always believe in, that what people remember as their previous lives is accurate, because there's a lot of people who remember being Cleopatra, but not many people who remember being Cleopatra's slave. Okay, so I don't, I look at these things with a little bit of caution. Anyway, they hypnotized this one woman, and she remembered being Dr. James Burns, who lived in, what was the name of that town? Do you remember? It was in Scotland. I can't remember the name of a certain city in Scotland. Sorry, I don't remember the name. Anyway, she remembered the name. Yeah. So she had never been to Scotland before. So the researchers, they all flew over to Scotland. As they were driving to this city, they blindfolded her so she wouldn't see, signs directing you to this or that. And then they stopped at a certain place in the town. And since she had remembered being a Dr. James Burns from a certain medical college, they said, "Can you locate the medical college?" And so she remembered the way from where she was to get to the college and led the researchers there. And then when they were walking around the college, she showed recognition of different rooms and how it looked, and she was clearly recognizing it. But she came to one spot and she said, "No, this isn't how I remember it. It's like, the corridor wasn't there. It was like this, and this was the way it was. This, how it is now, is not the way I remember it." So then what they did, the researchers went down into the library and they had found that there was a Dr. James Burns who taught there in the 16th or 17th century. They went down into the library, found the blueprints for the building, the layout of the college that accorded with the time when Dr. James Burns was there. And they found that actually it corresponded to how she remembered it because they had remodeled the building. So that's pretty good proof, isn't it? Yeah. Then, another interesting story. I was in Florida one time, and I was giving a talk at a public library. And Florida is a place in the U.S. where a lot of people go to retire. So there's a lot of senior citizens there. So they came to hear my talk about rebirth at the library. And afterwards, one woman comes up to me and she said, and she wasn't a Buddhist. She said, "Thank you. What you said really helps me understand my son. Because my son, ever since he was a little baby, he, and as he grew up and, was in infancy, and I mean, not since he was a baby, since he was, a young child, he was interested in music. And when he heard different pieces of classical music being played, he could say this was Beethoven's symphony number blah blah, and this was Chopin's, quartet blah blah." And the mother said, "Nobody in our family was musically inclined, and nobody else knew this. And yet he could identify this, and he learned to play music very quickly when he was young." And so she said, "I think I understand now why he was like that. Yeah, it must have come from tendencies in a previous life." And she wasn't Buddhist. How many of you were parents? Lots of you. Okay? If you have more than one child, or even if you have one child, does your child have a personality from day one? They do, don't they? Day one, they have their own personalities. If you have more than one child, do they have the same personalities when they're infants, when they're just a couple of days old? This morning at BGF, one couple brought to me their baby, 1 week old, 7 days old. Yeah? And they had a son, too, that was a few years older. And the mother told me right off the bat, you know, these kids have such different personalities. The son, as an infant, restless, cried a lot. This little baby, a little girl, so peaceful. Except when she was being changed or she was hungry, she was just peaceful. Your kids don't come in as empty slates. They come in with tendencies, don't they? They come in with dispositions and inclinations. Where did that come from? Now, somebody may say, well, it came from the genes. Yeah, okay. Now, I believe that some things, our genes, yes, they play a role. But I think nowadays we attribute a lot to genes that is not due to genes. Okay. So, for example, you look at somebody like me. Yeah. Born in Chicago, grew up in California, never met a Buddhist until I was in my 20s. Yeah. Knew nothing about Buddhism growing up. Why in the world am I a Buddhist? And why in the world did I become a nun? Yeah. My mother assures me there are no Buddhists in my genes. Yeah. If you trace my genealogy back, she said there are no Buddhists. Okay? So I didn't become a Buddhist because of genes. So that's the nature part. What's the nurture part? I didn't know anything about Buddhism growing up. I was brought up in another religion, which I tried to accept but couldn't. So where does this interest in Buddhism come from? Not from nature, the genes, not from nurture, my environment. No. Only thing you can point to is previous lives. Yeah. And it's probably the same thing for you too. You could have wound up being different religions, different occupations, different anything. Yeah. But we come in with predispositions from previous lives. So we happen to have very fortunate predispositions because we're able to meet the Dharma and encounter teachings and teachers, and we have our senses intact, and we're not impoverished, and we live in a place where there's religious freedom. Yeah. And we have interest in the Dharma. So we are very, very fortunate in this life to have met the Dharma and be able to practice it and have the interest in doing so. So I think all of us had created some very good karma in previous lives. So let's not fritter it away. Let's not waste it in this lifetime. Because whoever we were in previous lives worked very hard to create the karma that led to this life. And probably over several previous lives, we worked very hard to be able to have the precious human life we have now. Yeah. So let's really use it well and use it to create virtue and purify non-virtue and listen to teachings and reflect on them and meditate on them. Okay. So there's a few moments left. We can do a little bit of question and maybe answer. I'm not guaranteeing anything. So I think there's a mic.
Yes. Thank you, Venerable, for the insightful teachings. So, Venerable Chok, we'll start with mind. We have two aspects, the clarity as well as the cognitive, and also on the continuum of life in consciousness. So I'm sure they have stimulated a lot of thinking after listening to Venerable. So does there anybody have questions to clarify or ask Venerable?
Thank you, Venerable. I would like to ask, some people have the opportunity to come in contact with the Dharma, but they may not connect with it. And that provides, a lot of grief for people who are close to this person. So what can we do to influence? Thank you.
You're talking about my family. Yeah. The Dalai Lama came to speak at a university that is a 5-minute drive from my parents' home. I could not get them to go. Yeah. Some people, they're so near and they're so far. Or one of my teachers, some people will go to his talks and they'll say, all he does is cough. I can't understand him. And they never come back. Or some people go to a Dharma talk and they leave and go, what were they talking about? That's too far out. Let's go have a beer. So you're right, it does bring the people, those of us who are Buddhist, it brings us a lot of grief and a lot of frustration because we would like our near and dear ones to meet the Dharma and have the benefit of practicing the Dharma. But there's an expression in English, you can lead a horse to water, but you can't make it drink. So we can do our best to, leave Dharma books around the house. Yeah, take some brochures, really, from here. They have these nice brochures, on the second floor. Leave them around the house. Maybe somebody will read them. Yeah. I gave my family my books. Even books by their own daughter. My mother read as far as the chapter on attachment, and then she stopped. My father didn't even pick it up, nor did my brother, nor did my sister. There's cats where I live. The cats sit on top of the Dharma books. Yeah. They have some affinity with the Dharma books. Yeah. But my family, forget it. Yeah. So the best you can kind of do is encourage them to create virtue. Encourage them to live ethically, because everybody believes in ethical conduct. Don't kill, don't steal, don't lie. Yeah, be kind, forgive others, be generous. Yeah, those are even secular values. Even if our family's from a different religion, they'll still believe in that. And so encourage them in that way. That's the best thing to do. And then make prayers that even if you're not able to benefit them in the Dharma this life, you hope to, by practicing well in this life, advance on the path. And then in a future life, when you encounter your parents, even though you probably won't remember them, may you be of benefit to them and lead them in the Dharma in that lifetime. And in the meantime, everybody else has been your parents in previous life. So if you can't help this life's family, help your family's members from previous lives. Because we've all been each other's relatives in previous lives. We just don't remember. Okay? I wish I had some magic thing that I could tell you that would work. But I don't. Yeah.
Venerable, I have two questions. Question one, I'm trying to link the difference between, or see the link between consciousness and karmic energy. Am I correct in saying that if consciousness is a bundle of energy, inside this energy is the karmic seed or energy or karma or something like that? Am I correct in saying that? The link?
Yeah. The mind is not any kind of material energy. It's just clarity and cognizance. And the karmic seeds, they say they're placed on the mind, but the mind isn't material, so it's not like putting a seed in the palm of your hand. Yeah? It's a karmic seed is something much more abstract. Yeah? But it continues along with the consciousness into the future lives.
Okay, second question is, there are millions of sperm and egg joining together. Now, how does a consciousness decide or choose which sperm or egg to join?
That's what I was saying. When we're ignorant beings, we don't choose. Yeah, we're not sitting up there, looking at job applications for parents. Okay? But rather, due to karma makes our mind attracted to one body or another. It makes us attracted to one family or another. Okay? So that's through the power of our previous actions.
So the main driving force is the karmic energy then?
Yeah.
Okay, thanks.
Yeah. But the karma arises due to ignorance and other afflictions. Okay? Okay, this will be the last question.
This last questions for tonight.
Thank you, Venerable. My inferior mind still has problems understanding the nature of mind. To me, consciousness seems to be a process that occurs when the body comes into contact with the mind or any other karmic energies, as you described it. How can a process continue on throughout different lives? What is the nature of that process that allows it to continue between the different incarnations?
Okay. So, yeah, the mind is is a process, but it's a noun too. A process is a noun. Yeah. So it's just one moment following another moment. In our form now, in order to cognize objects, you need three things coming together. You need the object, like, the black color of the gong. You need a sense faculty. So that would probably be like the rods and cones on the back of my retina. And you need a previous moment of consciousness. So when those three come together, then the consciousness is generated in the aspect of the object and perception occurs. Okay? Does that answer your question? Yeah? Yeah? Kind of? Okay. Okay. So, let's conclude our evening. I want to lead you in a little dedication. Yeah. So, for a moment, rejoice at what you did together. You did here this evening, that it was time well spent. Yeah, you spent your time learning the Dharma, thinking about it, and what you learned is just the tip of the iceberg. You have something now you can go home and think some more about. So rejoice at the virtue, the good karma you created as an individual tonight. And rejoice at the good karma everybody here created. And rejoice at all the goodness there is in the world. And then let's dedicate all that goodness and all the good karma everybody anywhere created. And you can think of that as like a light in the center of your chest that you then radiate out to all living beings. So dedicate your virtue by imagining you radiating it out in the form of light. And as that light touches all the living beings, their hearts and minds become peaceful, become open, become receptive to the Dharma, and gain realizations. Due to this merit, may we soon attain the awakened state of Guru Buddha, that we may be able to liberate all sentient beings from their suffering. May the precious Bodhi mind, not yet born, arise and grow. May that born have no decline, but increase forevermore. Okay. So please continue to think about what you heard. We'll continue sharing the Dharma together tomorrow evening, assuming we'll all still be alive. Okay?